You can't sit here. First class is for paying customers only." The flight attendant's voice sliced through the air, her glare fixed on the black woman standing calmly with her boarding pass. Whispers rippled through the cabin, passengers avoiding eye contact. None of them knew she was a federal auditor, and in just hours her report would send shockwaves through the airline, toppling careers from the top down. Black woman denied first-class seat, but she's actually an undercover federal auditor. A whirlwind of tension crept into the bustling terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport as an accomplished yet unassuming black woman prepared to board her flight. Her posture was poised, her eyes set on the entrance to the jet bridge, and her ticket clearly displayed first-class seat 3A. But from the moment she stepped into view, hushed murmurs rippled among certain onlookers who questioned whether she belonged in that exclusive cabin. Little did anyone know this poised traveler carried a hidden purpose and an authority that could bring giants to their knees. Her quiet resolve was about to unleash a storm no one saw coming. The crisp morning light bounced off the gleaming floors of John F. Kennedy Intern Airport's Terminal 8, revealing a scene that was both chaotic and exhilarating. Travelers luged suitcases bursting at the seams, children clutched stuffed animals, and airport staff bustled around, pointing people toward check-in counters. And gates amid the throng, a woman named Aaliyah Daniels stepped gingerly off the escalator. She wore a simple but elegant navy blue pantsuit and carried herself with a calm precision that hinted at intense self-control. Aaliyah was in her early 30s, her locks pinned back in a neat, low bun. She was not one to draw attention, preferring to navigate spaces with a quiet grace as she walked through the terminal. No extraneous movements bellied her intent. Everything she did, tucking her ID into an inside pocket, handing her ticket to the attendant, gently placing her carry-on in the overhead bin. Once on board was done with deliberate care. She wasn't one to waste energy or invite scrutiny. Her ticket was for first class on an American Airlines flight bound for Los Angeles. The seat had been purchased in her name through a legitimate reservation system with no special arrangements signifying who she truly was. If all went as planned, nobody on this trip would have any clue about her secondary identity, that is, unless they forced her hand. Aaliyah needed a moment to collect her thoughts before checking in. She found a corner by a large column near the security checkpoint. Quickly reviewing her mental checklist, she confirmed the internal memos she had been scanning the night before, each highlighting subtle forms of harassment reported by travelers across various airlines. This was part of her official mission, investigating allegations of discriminatory practices against people of color, including preferential treatment for certain passengers. While others were belittled or actively barred from upgrades, she glanced up at the overhead sign that our security checkpoint, where impatient travelers hurriedly took off shoes and belts with her official ID stowed safely in her hidden wallet. No one would suspect that she was, in fact, a senior investigator for the U.S. Department of Transportation, a federal auditor working undercover to evaluate airline compliance. With anti-discrimination laws, she had a tough job to do, and the first step was always the same: blend in, watch, and only reveal her official capacity if absolutely necessary. Shortly after clearing security without any fuss, Aaliyah approached Gate 23B, where the overhead display flashed flight AON 198 to Los Angeles. She was early. Boarding wasn't scheduled to begin for another 20 minutes. Sitting down in the waiting area, she noticed an older couple in matching travel sweaters whispering to each other. The man discreetly looked over at her, then turned back to his wife with a raised eyebrow. Their subtle side glances might have meant nothing at all, but in Aaliyah's line of work, every flicker of attention was cataloged as the minutes passed. More passengers crowded the gate. Young professionals in suits typed furiously on laptops, anxious families jostled kids, and a few seemingly high-profile business people exuded impatience. The gate agent, a woman with sharp features and a tidy updo, began, arranging the microphone and the paperwork for boarding. Then it happened, a small event that Aaliyah had become all too accustomed to over her years in this job. The gate agent's eyes paused on Aaliyah longer than necessary, scanning her from head to toe. There was no immediate hostility, no direct confrontation, just a silent, laser-focused scrutiny. When first-class boarding was announced, Aaliyah calmly stood and moved to the front of the line ticket. In hand, the gate agent's smile froze the moment she saw the zone indicated on Aaliyah's boarding pass. Aaliyah tried not to bristle at the sudden coldness that replaced that customer service grin she'd encountered far too many microaggressions to be rattled by them. "Now, Mom," the gate agent said, tapping at her keyboard as if searching for an error. "Your seat says 3A in first class, is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct," Aaliyah replied. Nodding politely, she held out her boarding pass and ID once more. "Is there an issue I need to check something? Could you step aside?" "Please," the agent request was delivered with the same plastic courtesy. But Aaliyah detected the underlying tension she obliged, stepping out of the line as other first-class passengers walked by, handing over their tickets without delay. There was a man in a tailored suit right behind her, and the agent offered him a warm smile, scanning his pass. Within seconds, he proceeded onto the jet bridge with no problem. Another woman wearing stylish sunglasses and carrying a designer bag also had her pass accepted without delay. Then the gate agent turned back to Aaliyah. "Could I see your ID again?" she asked, voice dripping with caution. Her eyes seemed to say, "I don't believe you." Aaliyah complied. She handed over her driver's license and the boarding pass. The agent studied them for an inordinate amount of time, typed furiously into the computer, and finally forced a stiff grin. "Okay, it looks like your reservation is in order." She said you can board. That initial moment of tension, however short, set the stage. Aaliyah's heart sank as she walked down the jet bridge, because in her experience, such a subtle challenge often heralded bigger obstacles ahead. Like clockwork, trouble usually escalated from there. She mentally prepared herself. This mission could prove more eventful than she initially anticipated. Entering the pristine first-class cabin, Aaliyah found seat 3A plush wide, with plenty of leg room. Precisely the seat she'd booked, she stowed her carry-on overhead and eased into the soft leather. A sense of mild relief washed over her. She had navigated the first test. Maybe this flight would be smooth after all, but a mere 5 minutes later, just as she was about to clip her seatbelt, the same gate agent marched down the aisle accompanied by a stern-looking flight attendant. Their eyes locked onto Aaliyah, and the gate agent pointed almost accusingly. "Miss Daniels," the agent said firmly, glancing at her notes. "There's been a change in seat assignments. I'm afraid we'll need you to move to coach." A subtle gasp came from a nearby passenger, a middle-aged woman wearing noise-canceling headphones who appeared to be watching. Aaliyah's pulse quickened, but her face remained an unreadable mask. "I'm sorry, there must be a mistake. I have a confirmed first-class ticket for seat 3A. Unfortunately, the flight attendant chimed in. We've had a situation where this seat was double-booked for a premium passenger. We're going to have to reassign your seat." Aaliyah's mind went into overdrive. Double bookings happened occasionally, sure, but they usually reassign the person who purchased the ticket last, or offer compensation. If there was an airline error, there was a protocol for these things, and forcibly moving someone who legitimately had a boarding pass in hand was highly unusual, especially if they had already been seated. She studied the flight attendant's face. A flicker of uncertainty suggested the flight attendant might be relying on the gate agent for direction. Aaliyah cleared her throat and maintained her composure. "You're asking me to move, even though I purchased this seat in advance, and there's no mention of an overbooking at the gate. Has there been an equipment change or any announcements?" "No announcements, but we need your seat." The gate agent insisted. Her tone and body language implied she considered the conversation over. "We'll find you something in economy." Aaliyah squared her shoulders. She was not about to let this go unchallenged, not simply because it was inconvenient for her, but because the entire scenario of the prejudice and discrimination she was tasked with uncovering. She decided to push back just enough to see what would happen. "I'm sorry," she said. "I have a fully paid first-class ticket." So if there truly is an issue, may I see the documentation or speak to a supervisor? I'm aware of airline policy, and this situation seems irregular. The gate agent frowned. Other passengers in first class, including a silver-haired man across the aisle, pretended not to listen, but their faces betrayed curiosity. The older couple from the waiting area, now seated 2 rows ahead, turned around to watch. "We are the authority here." The gate agent snapped cheeks, reining slightly. "We've told you the seat is being given to another passenger. You can comply and move to economy, or you can catch another flight. Those are your options. Miss Daniels." Aaliyah paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. She could escalate by showing her official credentials, but she knew that revealing her identity too soon might compromise the rest of her investigative trip. She decided on a different approach. "Is that your final decision? Because I'd really like to speak with the lead flight attendant or the pilot. If this is a misunderstanding, you can file a complaint with customer service once we land," the agent said coldly. "We're out of time here. We need this resolved now." Aaliyah took a measured breath out of the corner of her eye. She noticed a man in a crisp business suit standing at the front of the cabin, apparently waiting to claim 3A. His gaze flicked from Aaliyah to the flight crew, seemingly agitated that the seat was still occupied. This passenger was white, wearing an expensive-looking watch and occasionally checking his phone like he had a million better places to be. "Excuse me." Aaliyah addressed him softly. "Did you also book 3A?" He looked slightly surprised that she spoke to him. "Yes," he said simply. "Crossing his arms, paid extra for it at check-in this morning." Aaliyah nodded politely. Maybe it was an honest overbooking, though typically the airline would offer a travel voucher or seat in another first-class row to the passenger who booked later, or even upgrade them on the next flight, instead of evicting the occupant mid-boarding. Yet here she was, forced out seemingly because the crew believed she was less deserving of the seat. She could almost see the gears turning in the gate agent's mind. They either assumed she didn't pay, or that a professional-looking, well-dressed white man must be the rightful occupant of first class, not her. It stung, but Aaliyah had a job to do. She grabbed her bag from the overhead compartment, her expression revealing nothing. The agent exhaled with relief, but Aaliyah's mind was already strategizing. This was precisely the kind of scenario she was investigating, and she intended to see it through. Moments later, Aaliyah found herself in row 25, squeezed into a middle seat in economy with 2 strangers on either side. The overhead bin was full, so she had to stow her carry-on several rows back. The man in the window seat was obliviously playing a game on his phone, while the woman on the aisle was preoccupied with rummaging in her purse. Neither paid attention to Aaliyah's shift in mood. She reminded herself to stay calm. Her job was to document every detail. She glanced at her phone, discreetly noting the flight number and timed the seat change and the gate agent's name, which she had glimpsed on her badge. Karen White. She also jotted down the flight attendant name. Tag Veronica. Some might have erupted in anger or insisted on speaking to a manager immediately, but Aaliyah possessed the patience of someone who had endured far, far worse. This was her methodology: observe, gather evidence, and watch how the airline handled the situation. If they truly discriminated against her, there would be accountability. The Department of Transportation took such allegations seriously, especially in light of recent public outcry. As she sank into the cramped seat, her emotions oscillated between professional resolve and personal disappointment. For all her training and composure, she was still a human being. She felt the humiliation creeping in, the sting of being singled out, ushered aside, and effectively told you don't belong here. The plane began taxiing, and Aaliyah tried to focus on the hum of the engines. She had a long flight ahead. Perhaps she could use the time to analyze some of the official airline documents stored on her tablet, or to review the many passenger testimonies she had collected during previous investigations. But an uneasy feeling in the pit of her stomach told her that this was only the beginning of the drama. 40 minutes into the flight, passengers in economy were settling into their routines, some dozing, others watching movies, a few flipping through the in-flight magazine. Aaliyah jotted down her observations how the flight attendant in the coach section seemed rushed and a bit curt. When interacting with passengers seated near her, she noticed an older black woman across the aisle had asked for a blanket 3 times, only to be ignored until a white passenger next to her flagged down the attendant. Aaliyah captured every detail the flight attendants forced. Smiles the subtle differences in tone when addressing different passengers. It wasn't blatantly racist, but it was the sort of pattern that, when viewed collectively, pointed to potential bias. Unexpectedly, a ripple of murmured conversation swept down the aisle. A tall, visibly flustered man wearing a pilot's uniform minus the jacket was making his way toward Aaliyah. She quickly recognized him as the plan's Captain Richard Harding. A name she had glimpsed on the pre-flight info screen next to him was the lead flight attendant, a middle-aged Latina woman named Lure, who looked a bit anxious. Aaliyah Daniels, Captain Harding said. Scanning the row numbers, when he spotted her, he gave a polite nod. "May we speak with you for a moment?" Aaliyah tensed. "Certainly," she replied quietly. Rising carefully so as not to disturb the dozing passenger next to her, she followed the captain and the lead flight attendant toward the small galley area behind first class, shielded from most passenger eyes by a draw curtain. She offered a polite smile, albeit tinged with a touch of skepticism. "How can I help you?" The captain cleared his throat. "I understand you had an issue with your seat in first class. There seems to be some confusion about that." Aaliyah resisted the urge to laugh at the understatement. "Yes, it appears I was. Reassigned, despite having a confirmed ticket, the gate agent indicated my seat was double booked, so I moved to economy lords." The lead flight attendant looked apologetic. "We just discovered the situation normally. If there's an overbooking, in first class, we handle it before anyone boards, and the passenger who paid first or who has the highest status gets priority. I'm trying to figure out how it was handled at the gate. The agent in question was, well, she left the aircraft already. She was replaced by another staff member." Once we departed, Aaliyah tilted her head, feigning mild confusion, but inwardly processing every word I was told by the gate agent and a flight attendant named Veronica, that I had to move because a premium passenger needed the seat. There was no mention of compensation or an apology for the mix-up. Captain Harding nodded grimly. "I'm concerned about that. We have protocols to follow, and it seems those protocols might not have been followed." Here Lords interjected. "We do have another seat in first class available, 5C. We'd like to offer it to you now. With our sincere apologies for the inconvenience." Aaliyah paused, tempted to accept. If she returned to first class, she could observe how the rest of the cabin functioned. Yet at the same time, she wondered if this abrupt about-face was merely damaged control after they realized they might have violated policy, or more critically, the law. "Thank you," she said carefully. "But I'm curious, why was I singled out in the first place, and why am I being offered a seat now when the flight is already well underway?" The captain and flight attendant exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. The captain shrugged. "I'm trying to figure that out myself." He admitted could have been an honest mistake. Or it could have been something else. Either way, we want to make it right. Please accept 5C and allow us to provide the service you paid for." Aaliyah gave a small nod, still not revealing her true identity or mission. "All right, I'll accept the seat, but I do have concerns I intend to address after the flight." Understood, Lords replied, sounding relieved. "We'll do everything we can to make your flight more comfortable." Aaliyah returned to economy to gather her belongings politely, excusing herself as she retrieved her carry-on from an overhead bin. Some passengers looked puzzled as she walked toward the front of the plane with her bag in tow. Settling into seat 5C, she exhaled. First class was indeed more spacious, with seats that reclined almost flat. She quickly took stock of the cabin. About 8 other passengers, each absorbed in their own tasks, reading, watching a movie, or snoozing. Despite the plush surroundings, the tension in her chest refused to subside. She knew her every action was being watched, and she suspected that the flight crew was now aware something deeper was going on. Why else would the captain personally intervene mid-flight shortly after Aaliyah settled in? The flight attendant named Veronica, who had previously escorted her out of first class, approached. Her face was pale with worry, and she clutched a service tray as though it were a lifeline. Miss Daniels, she began quietly. I'm sorry if there was any confusion earlier, one. I thought there was an overbooked seat, and I was following instructions from the gate agent. Aaliyah looked up, affixing a polite but distant expression. I understand. Thank you for your concern. Veronica placed a small snack basket on the center console. Please let me know if there's anything I can do. Would you like a complimentary beverage? Aaliyah nodded, deciding to test how far the courtesy extended. A glass of champagne would be lovely. I'll bring that right away, Veronica responded. She left, nearly bumping into the seat in front of her in her haste once alone. Aaliyah tapped a note into her phone. Flight attendant. Veronica, now apologetic, claims instructions came from gate agent. Potential scapegoating or actual confusion. Her mind roiled with possibilities. She recalled reading multiple passenger complaints, mostly from minority travelers who said they were either bumped from seats they had paid for or told they shouldn't be in first class. The stories were eerily similar. Some claimed the airline staff had told them it was a mistake or technical glitch. Aaliyah's investigation aimed to determine if these incidents were part of a pattern: blatant racial profiling disguised as booking errors. Another flight attendant, a different one from Veronica, approached with a tray carrying a chilled flute of champagne for you. Miss Daniels, is there anything else you need right now? Aaliyah smiled politely, though her gut churned. No, thank you. This is fine for now. The attendant left, and Aaliyah sipped her champagne, letting her gaze wander around the first-class cabin. The man who had taken 3A earlier was now engrossed in his laptop, occasionally sipping from a bottle of water. The older couple that had stared at her in the waiting area were now dozing quietly. Time seemed to slow. It was a strange calm, like the eye of a hurricane. Aaliyah sensed more turbulence to come. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from her fellow investigator, Marcus Yuan, who was stationed in another part of the plane. They were traveling separately on the same flight standard procedure for covert audits. She discreetly unlocked her phone to read his message. Marcus, 12:47 p.m. Heard you got bumped to coach everything, okay? I overheard some commotion up front. Marcus, 12:49 p.m. I might have new intel from the steward in my section. Let's meet once we land. Aaliyah typed a quick reply. Aaliyah, 12:50 p.m. I'm back in first now. Captain intervened. We'll talk after landing. Marcus was working on the same case, though, from a different angle, posing as a passenger in coach, paying close attention to how staff treated people of different backgrounds. If he was hearing new intel, that meant other passengers or crew might be voicing concerns or letting slip behind the scenes. Tidbits as the flight progressed. The seatbelt sign turned off and flight attendants began meal service for first class. The aroma of roasted chicken and seared salmon wafted through the cabin. Aaliyah was halfway through her meal, a delicious plate of pasta, when loud voices reached her ears. She recognized one of them as Veronica's. You were the one who insisted she moved. Veronica, hissed her voice. Tau with anger, she was speaking to the other flight attendant from earlier, an older woman, presumably a senior staff member. I only followed your lead. Aaliyah couldn't hear the other attendant's reply, but she certainly caught Veronica's frustrated retort. This is going to cost us big. If she complains, why do you even call the gate agent over? Aaliyah chewed slowly, feigning disinterest, but her heart pounded. The conversation confirmed her suspicions that airline staff were aware they'd mishandled the situation and that they feared a formal complaint. She kept her eyes down, focusing on her meal, drawing attention. Now might scare them into silence, then out of nowhere she heard a male voice shout from the aisle behind her, "Don't you walk away from me! I want answers." She turned to see a passenger with disheveled hair and an oversized T-shirt glaring at the flight attendant. His face was twisted in rage. I've been pressing the call button for 5 minutes. My wife needs help with an allergic reaction and you're ignoring us. Time seemed to freeze. Passengers around them, startled, half rising from their seats to see what was happening. Veronica rushed over looking panicked. "Sir, I'm sorry, but enough apologies," the man roared. "I saw you chatting up that passenger for the last 10 minutes, but my wife can't breathe." He gestured frantically to a woman slumped in. In her seat, face flushed and puffy, Aaliyah immediately unfastened her seatbelt. She was no medical expert, but she recognized an emergency when she saw one instinct took over, and she hurried toward the commotion. By the time she arrived, the woman's lips were swollen and her breathing was labored. Passengers were scattering, offering space. "What did she eat?" Aaliyah asked quickly. She told them she was allergic to nuts." The husband stammered, voice breaking with fear. They said they'd confirm her meal didn't have any, but she started feeling sick. 15 minutes ago, Aaliyah's adrenaline surged if the catering had inadvertently used nuts or cross-contaminated the meal. This woman could be in serious danger. "We need the flight attendants to call for medical assistance immediately," she said, scanning the overhead bins. "Does anyone have an EpiPen?" A man 2 rows forward stood up. "I have one in my bag," he said, rushing to retrieve it. Veronica scrambled to get on the intercom. "Is there a doctor on board? We have a medical emergency in row 6. The woman's breathing became more ragged. Her terrified husband hovered helplessly, tears welling in his eyes. Aaliyah knelt down, feeling the woman's pulse, which was rapid, and she recalled basic first aid training. This was anaphylaxis, a severe allergic reaction. The EpiPen arrived, and with trembling hands, the husband administered it to his wife's thigh. Within a minute or two, her breathing eased slightly. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the passengers. As the crisis seemed to stabilize, the woman would still need medical attention upon landing. But for now, she was conscious and her breathing was improving. Veronica was apologizing profusely, tears glimmering. In her eyes, the older flight attendant, who had apparently made the meal assignment, was nowhere to be seen. Aaliyah wondered if she was hiding or trying to radio for more help. In the aftermath, the cabin's atmosphere was charged with tension. The husband glared at the crew. "You nearly killed her," he shouted, voice cracking. "She told you she was IC and you ignored it. I was pressing the call button for so long. Why does nobody listen to the people in these seats?" His outburst echoed a sentiment Aaliyah had heard many times, that certain staff members paid less attention or gave less respect to certain passengers. Whether that was due to race, class, or some other bias was what Aaliyah needed to ascertain. Over the next 2 hours, the flight crew walked on eggshell. The pilot made an announcement about the medical situation, assuring passengers that paramedics would meet them at the gate in Los Angeles. The woman who'd suffered the allergic reaction stabilized enough to sip water. Her husband cradled her head, glaring at the flight attendants whenever they passed by. Aaliyah returned to her seat. Though it felt impossible to relax, chaos had rattled the entire cabin, making the earlier seat dispute feel almost secondary. Yet she knew that in the official report, both incidents would loom large, indicating systemic breakdowns, one in the form of potential discrimination, and the other in failing to heed critical medical details. Suddenly, Veronica slipped into the seat next to Aaliyah, likely an unorthodox move for a flight attendant, but the seat was empty, so she took the chance. She looked haggard, eyes rimmed in red. "Miss Daniels," she said quietly, voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. I need to talk to you. May we speak privately?" Aaliyah glanced around. People were mostly absorbed in their own anxieties, but a few curious glances drifted their way. "Sure," she replied softly. Veronica led her to the galley area again. She began talking in a hushed, urgent tone. "Look, I know you probably hate me for what happened, but it wasn't personal. The gate agent insisted she claimed you were on some watch list or that your ticket was flagged as fraudulent. I didn't want to cause trouble, but I was told to get you out of that seat. Then I found out none of that was true." Aaliyah's stomach clenched. A watch list. A flagged ticket. The mention of a watch list was particularly alarming and suspicious. She kept her expression neutral, letting Veronica continue. I overheard the gate agent talking to the old attendant Carla about you. Veronica admitted they said something like, "She's not going to get a free ride in first class on my watch. I tried to just follow orders. I feel terrible." Aaliyah let a moment of silence hang between them. "Veronica, do you know why the gate agent would think my ticket was fraudulent? Did she have any proof or reason?" Veronica shook her head. "No. She mentioned something about how people try to scam their way into these seats all the time, but it didn't feel right. Especially when I looked at your ticket, and it was completely valid. That's why I was so shaken when the captain got involved. He was furious that you were forced to move there. It was in blunt terms an implicit assumption that a black woman in first class must be trying to cheat the system." Aaliyah's heart pounded with a mix of anger and vindication. This was exactly the type of discriminatory practice her department was cracking down on. She had enough to file a significant complaint, but she still needed more evidence, more details to nail down the systematic nature of this issue. "I appreciate your honesty," Aaliyah replied quietly. "If you're concerned about repercussions, I suggest speaking with your union rep or a supervisor. This isn't something that can just be swept under the rug." Veronica nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I know I'm prepared to face the consequences if it means telling the truth." Aaliyah inwardly commended Veronica's courage. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly before deciding to plant a subtle hint. "If you ever need to file a report or talk to someone in authority, you should contact the Department of Transportation's Aviation Discrimination Hotline. They handle cases like this." Veronica blinked in surprise at Aaliyah's specific knowledge, but she didn't question it. "I will," she murmured. "I promise." About an hour before landing the plane, hit a patch of turbulence, the seatbelt sign flashed on, and the pilot's voice rang through the speakers instructing everyone to remain seated. Trays rattled and overhead bins shook ominously across the aisle. A baby wailed. Flight attendants rushed to strap themselves into jump seats, abruptly ending any quiet conversations. Aaliyah's mind drifted to the ramifications of all that had happened so far. She could practically draft the final report in her head. Unjust seat, reassignment, blatant disregard for passenger safety instructions, potential racially motivated assumptions by gate agent, inadequate medical emergency response. Each bullet point painted a damning picture of systemic fail. When the turbulence finally eased, the pilot announced that they were beginning their descent into Los Angeles. The flight attendants rushed to finalize cabin checks. Aaliyah noticed that Carla, the older flight attendant who'd been conspicuously absent since the allergic reaction incident, emerged from behind a curtain looking disheveled. She took a seat in the jump seat at the front of first class, avoiding eye contact with passengers. Aaliyah caught a snippet of conversation between Carla and another flight attendant who was strapped into the adjacent jump seat. Carla muttered, "I'm not taking the fall for that gate agent nonsense," to which the other attendant replied, "Just do your job, Carla. We'll sort this out on the ground." The plane landed smoothly at Los Angeles International Airport, and paramedics swiftly boarded to assist the woman who had suffered the allergic reaction. Her husband helped her into a wheelchair. Gratitude and lingering anger competing on his face. He offered a tense nod to the flight crew as she was wheeled away. A few passengers clapped politely, relieved that she was all right, though the mood was far from celebratory. Aaliyah gathered her belongings, eyeing the disembarkation process. She saw Veronica conferring with the captain near the cockpit door. Then Marcus materialized from the economy aisle, his expression grave once they were off the aircraft. They planned to debrief in a discreet corner of the arrivals terminal to compare notes. Stepping off the plane, Aaliyah felt the warm California air filter in through the corridor. She also felt the weight of what had transpired settle over her like an invisible cloak. The gate area was bustling with people waiting to board the plane's next leg or meeting incoming passengers. She scanned the Crow, spotting a man in a suit that looked suspiciously like an airline manager standing with arms folded. He seemed to be waiting for the flight crew to emerge so he could get a briefing on the incident. Aaliyah walked briskly, weaving through clusters of travelers until she reached a less crowded area near baggage claim there. Marcus waited, leaning against a column A, subdued expression on his face. "You good?" he asked, handing her a bottled water he'd picked up along the way. "I'm fine," she replied. "A lot happened up front. What about you, Marcus?" Exhaled slowly. Similar nonsense in the back. I watched at least 3 instances where they ignored people who needed help. Everyone in my section who got prompt service was white or obviously affluent. The others waited. It's not as obvious as a direct slur, but the pattern was there. Aaliyah took a slow drink of water. Veronica, one of the flight attendants, basically admitted they were told to get me out of first class because the gate agent thought my seat was a scam. Or she used the watch list excuse. Who knows if that was code for something else? Marcus nodded grimly. That lines up with the chatter. I overheard a random passenger from our section said he saw you being forced out of first, and it made him furious. He claimed it looked like blatant discrimination. They paused their conversation as a throng of newly arrived travelers passed by a man in a Hawaiian shirt, juggled multiple suitcases, while a little girl in pigtails trailed behind him once the foot traffic cleared. Marcus leaned in again. "What's our next move?" he asked quietly. Aaliyah felt a surge of clarity. We filed the report under our official credentials, escalated to the Department of Transportation Enforcement Division, and recommend a formal inquiry. This flight alone gave us enough evidence of multiple violations. Marcus nodded, agreed. "Let in get our stuff. Find a quiet place and document everything thoroughly while waiting at the carousel for their luggage." Aaliyah spotted the older flight attendant, Carla, strolling past with her rolling suitcase. Her posture was rigid, her gaze darting around as though she feared confrontation. She nearly jumped when she realized Aaliyah was standing a few feet away. Aaliyah seized the moment. "Excuse me, Carla," she said in a measured tone. Carla turned, a flicker of recognition and dread crossing her face. "Why?" "Yes," she asked. "I just wanted to let you know that I understand the gate agent may have pressured the cabin crew, but I'll be filing an official complaint about the seat incident." Aaliyah's voice was even devoid of anger but firm. Carla's eyes widened. She glanced around to see if anyone was listening. I was told your seat was a mistake," she said defensively. "We do get scammers. Sometimes I was just trying to do my job." Marcus, who'd been standing to the side, stepped forward. "You were so concerned about a scammer that you kicked a paying passenger out of first class after she was already seated with no offer of compensation or a decent explanation." His tone was disarmingly calm, but the accusation was clear. Carla bristled. "You don't understand. The gate agent said she was an unauthorized occupant. We get stowaways." Sometimes her voice escalated a notch, attracting a few curious glances. Aya remained poised. "I had a valid boarding pass and ID. There was no reason to suspect me of anything other." Then your own assumptions." Carla averted her eyes. "Look, it's done all right." She pulled her suitcase handle and tried to pivot away, but Aaliyah's next words froze her in place. In addition to the complaint, "I'm also an investigator from the Point U.S. Department of Transportation. My colleague and I will be including any relevant statements in our official report. Do you wish to add anything now, or remain silent?" Carla's mouth fell open for a moment. She seemed at a loss for words. Then her eyes welled with tears. She looked around, desperate, as if searching for an escape when none presented itself. She whispered, I had no idea. I was just following instructions. Please, you have to believe me." Aaliyah watched her tremble, torn between pity and outrage. "I'll include your statement, but you need to understand a federal inquiry is serious if there was wrongdoing, if instructions from the gate agent were improper or discriminatory. Now is the time to say so." Carla swallowed hard. I don't want to lose my job." Marcus's voice was gentle. Honesty might actually help you blaming the gate agent or ignoring the truth. Won't the best thing you can do is come clean and help change the system? Carla nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'll do it. I'm sorry. She turned and walked away, shoulders slumped, leaving Aaliyah and Marcus in the swirl of baggage claim crowds. They stood quietly for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. Later that evening, Aaliyah settled into her room at the Westin Bonaventure Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She stretched out on the king-size bed laptop, balanced on her knees, meticulously typing up the day's notes. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but she barely noticed, lost in the swirl of events. She documented everything from the moment she arrived at JFK to the final conversation with Carla. A knock on the door pulled her from her work. She peered through the peephole and saw Marcus standing there with a somber expression opening the door. She ushered him in. He carried a small pizza box under one arm. "Figured you hadn't eaten," he said by way of greeting, handing her the box. "Thanks," she murmured, grateful for the thoughtfulness. He sank into the armchair by the desk, running a hand through his hair. "I've been on calls with the department. They want a preliminary report. ASAP word has already traveled about the seat. Denial and the allergic reaction." Fiasco. Aaliyah opened the pizza box, took a slice of pepperoni, and placed it on a napkin. Word travels fast. Marcus nodded. "They also want to know if we suspect an ongoing pattern or just a few isolated incidents. I told them we have plenty of preliminary evidence to indicate a pattern." Aaliyah let out a slow breath. "I'll finalize our combined notes tonight. We should have enough for them by morning. Then the department can decide how to proceed, probably a formal hearing. Marcus speculated could lead to heavy fines, mandatory anti-discrimination, training, maybe even certain staff getting dismissed." She nodded. Taking a bite of pizza, her appetite was more out of necessity than enjoyment. "Did you hear anything else about that gate agent Karen White?" Marcus's mouth twisted in distaste. "I found out from a ground staff contact that Karen White has a history of complaints lodged against her. Several revolve around allegations of discriminatory or rude behavior. The airline has apparently kept her on." Despite repeated warnings, Aaliyah's eyes narrowed. Unbelievable. That means the airline might face even more liability if they knew she was problematic and did nothing. They continued their discussion for over an hour, cross-referencing passenger statements and airline policies event. Yuli Marcus left to return to his own room, leaving Alia alone with her thoughts. She stared at her reflection in the mirror across the room. She was proud of her work, proud that she was fighting not just for herself, but for every passenger who had been mistreated. Still, the emotional weight was heavy before. Turning off the lights, Aaliyah sent a final email to her supervisor at the dot, summarizing the day's events. The subject line read, "Urgent possible pattern of discriminatory practices. American Airlines flight, AAO 198, JFK to LAX the next day." Aaliyah and Marcus had scheduled meetings with American Airlines regional management in Los Angeles. Typically, such meetings were arranged quietly and with minimal fanfare, especially when an undercover operation was suddenly made known inside a bland conference room with glass walls. They sat across from two regional managers, a man named Joseph Peterson and a woman named Andrea Lee. Both wore practiced corporate smiles. "Thank you for meeting with us." Andrea began. "We understand there were some concerns about yesterday's flight." Aaliyah nodded, once sliding a folder across the table. "In addition to being passengers on that flight, Mr. Angan and I are federal auditors with the Point. U.S. Department of Transportation. We've compiled numerous incidents of potential discrimination and policy violations. That's all detailed in this folder." Joseph's face paled. He opened the folder, flipping through printed statements and official forms. Andrea leaned in, reading over his shoulder. Their eyes flicked anxiously from line to line. "We take these matters very seriously," Joseph said at last, clearing his throat. "But we do ask for fairness in your assessment. Our staff is trained to follow policy, and sometimes mistakes happen. Marcus stayed calm. Mistakes do happen, but when the same mistakes disproportionately affect passengers of color or are repeated by specific staff members with prior complaints, that's an indicator of systemic issues. Our mission is to ensure compliance with federal regulations. We'd prefer cooperation rather than conflict. And Andrea's eyes darted to Joseph. We're prepared to cooperate fully, she said quickly. We'll suspend gate agent Karen White pending further investigation, and we'll review the performance records of the flight attendants involved. Aaliyah inclined her head. We also witnessed an inadequate response to a passenger medical emergency and multiple accounts of staff ignoring or delaying service for certain passengers. Are you prepared, prepared to address that as well? Andrea swallowed. Yes, of course, that's unacceptable. Joseph began to say something else, but Aaliyah held up a hand. We've documented enough to initiate a formal inquiry. We'll be conducting interviews with relevant staff. We request that the airline not interfere. Joseph exhaled, pressing his lips together. Understood. We'll cooperate. We'd like to keep this as low profile as possible. Marcus nodded. We can't promise discretion. If we uncover major violations, the department's priority is accountability, not PR cover. The tension in the room was palpable by the time the meeting ended. It was clear that the airline's management feared a large-scale scandal and the potential financial penalties that might follow later that afternoon. As Aaliyah walked through the lobby of the DO's regional office in downtown LA, she received a call from an unknown number. She stepped aside into a quiet alcove near a row of potted plants to answer. This is Aaliyah, she said. A trembling female voice responded, Hello, Miss Daniels. This is Veronica from yesterday's flight. Aaliyah's brow furrowed. Yes, Veronica, are you all right? Veronica sighed. Not really. I just got word that they're interrogating me about the seat incident. Management wants me to say it was a misunderstanding or a minor error. But I can't do that anymore, not when I know the truth. AIR felt a surge of respect for Veronica. I understand you want to give a statement that supports the truth, even if it implicates people higher up. Yes, Veronica said, voice quavering. I've seen this happen before. Karen White has a reputation, and some flight attendants just go along with her demands to avoid conflict. I don't want to be part of that system anymore. Aaliyah nodded, though Veronica couldn't see her. You're doing the right thing. Here's what we can do. I can put you in touch with our legal counsel at the DOT so you can provide a deposition under legal protections. No intimidation, no fear of retribution. She could almost hear Veronica's relief crackling through the phone line. That would be a huge weight off my shoulders. Then let's arrange it, Aaliyah replied kindly. I'll email you the details. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. They ended the call, and Aaliyah jotted down more notes. Veronica's testimony could be the linchpin in a case against not just Karen White, but possibly other systemic abuses over the next few weeks. American Airlines found itself under growing scrutiny. News outlets caught wind of the case, spurred by social media posts from other passengers who had witnessed the seat dispute, and the medical emergency hashtags demanding accountability circulated online, pushing the airline to release a public statement claiming they were conducting an internal review behind the scenes. The DU's inquiry proceeded with interviews and depositions. Veronica testified under oath, revealing that Karen White specifically targeted Aaliyah, claiming her kind never pays. For first, Carla also gave a statement, albeit more reluctantly, acknowledging that she'd overheard Karen White using terms like "those people" when referring to black passengers who found their way into premium cabins. Internal emails surfaced, showing that Karen White had indeed flagged Aaliyah's reservation as fraudulent within the airline system. Even though there was no evidence to support that claim, the digital paper trail clearly demonstrated that Karen White harbored a bias and exploited her authority to enforce it in a dramatic twist. The passenger who'd been forced to administer the EpiPen to his wife also filed a massive lawsuit against the airline for negligence and emotional distress. That case further pressured the airline to make sweeping changes before the DOT had even completed its investigation. Karen White was fired. Carla received a formal reprimand and was placed on probation. While Veronica, once fearful, was ironically promoted after her testimony exposed serious flaws in how staff were trained, it was a complicated twist of fate. But it sent a clear message to the airline community. Ignoring discrimination wasn't just unethical, it was a financial and reputational nightmare. 6 weeks after that fateful flight, Aaliyah walked through an airport once again. This time Chicago O'Hare, heading home. After concluding another round of investigations, she wore the same unassuming pantsuit, carried the same efficient carry-on. But her heart felt lighter, confident that real progress was being made. She passed through security without incident, though she spotted a traveler who stared a bit too long at her first-class boarding pass. Aaliyah smiled to herself. Old habits of suspicion died hard, but she no longer felt the sting. She was forging real change. One investigation at a time. As she neared her gate, she received a text from Marcus, who was back at the main office in Washington, D.C. See Marcus, 10:25. AM latest verdict. Airline is fined $2 million for discrimination plus mandatory diversity training for all employees. Victory. Aaliyah's lips curled into a grin. She typed back, Aaliyah. 10:26. It's a start, more battles to fight. But yes, this one's a win. Tucking her phone away, she looked at the gate agent, who offered her a friendly smile upon scanning her ticket. No questions. No demands to step aside. Aaliyah proceeded onto the jet bridge, head held high every step, a reminder that she was more than someone to be underestimated. She was an agent of change. Every once in a while, a moment of injustice ignites a fire powerful enough to illuminate hidden corners of society. Aaliyah's experience on flight AA098 wasn't just a minor seat dispute. It was a catalyst revealing prejudices and systemic failure. Her identity as a federal investigator forced the airline to face a truth. It had long sidestepped. Discrimination lurked in its own hallways and cabins, the aftermath ranging from staff. Confessions to multi-million-dollar penalties sent a shockwave of accountability through the entire aviation industry. No matter how small the initial spark, when people of conscience stand firm, change becomes not just possible, but inevitable. If this story resonates with you, don't let the conversation end here. Speak up against bias. Support those who challenge injustice and help spread this message. Give this video a like, share it with friends, and subscribe to this channel. Together we can transform every bold stand into a brighter tomorrow.